University and Welsh language manager. Natalie, can I just check um, that you have been able to access the system? Now I can see you, Judge Singh, and thank you for your presentation. Natalie, have you been able to join, and are you able to give your presentation now? Thank you.
Hi, Uzo. Yes, you've just, now that it's gone live, I can see you. I have a mic, but I don't have share
Function.
facility. So,
okay, Taiwo, could you please enable the share function so that Natalie can present?
Thank you. Bore da pawb, a diolch yn fawr iawn am eich ymynyddgar. Thank you everyone for your patience. We are so sorry that this was a bit rocky this morning, and we appreciate that you're all very busy people and that your time is precious. So thank you very much for joining with us this morning. So I am now going to share my screen, and I hope you can all see it. My mic has been enabled. Can everybody hear me? Brilliant. I can see thumbs up. Okay, wonderful. So this is a little bit slow at the minute. Can you see the slides? If someone could answer in the chat. Yes, you can see the slides.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Yes.
So, bore da unwaith eto pawb. Oh, Natalie Brown can't see. She can't hear. Okay.
She can pick it up on live stream later. Anybody who can't see or hear can see it on live stream.
Brilliant. Ronald, oh yeah, Kerry. Yeah, some people can see. Wonderful. Okay. So I am the Education, Diversity and Welsh Language Manager for S4C. And my job is to enrich the experience of children and adults who are on an education path, and to be an active contact with the community and reflect Wales in its entirety. So my bosses were very happy to learn that I do work with Race Council Cymru also, and asked if I would be happy to link the work I do with them to the work I do with S4C. And of course, Wales is quite unique definitely within Europe, perhaps the world, as we are the first nation to say that we are taking an anti-racist stance, and we are working towards being an anti-racist nation by 2030. We're also the only nations, definitely within the British Isles, to declare Black history or a Black curriculum as mandatory for the curriculum. So of course we understand that schools are on different areas of their journey on this. Not everybody's in the same place on their path with Black history and Black education within the curriculum. But of course, the message we would like to make today is that Black history is Welsh history and not separate. And so what we want to encourage you to do is not think about this as more work, but working differently, because we understand that every time something changes socially, the onus is always put on the education and teachers. Oh, they need to teach this, they need to do this, they need to add this. So we'd like you to think about maybe working a little bit differently, and here are some tips, because we want this to be a practical session where you can leave here and feel like, I actually learned something, I feel supported, and I know where to go for help. And the first thing we'd ask you to do is to understand that ethnic diversity is not always skin colour, but skin colour does create different life experiences. So I'm going to say that if you have Black or brown children in your class, in your school, it is highly, highly likely that they have experienced racism, even if you have not been told about it or observed it. And we need you to be aware of that. But also to remember that if you're in a school or a class where you think that everybody looks white, it doesn't mean that there isn't diversity there. In one school where I was told, well, we don't do a lot of this because we're not a very diverse school. Children then went on to tell me that they had an auntie or uncle from Vietnam, Jamaica, Nigeria, France. You know, the class was a lot more diverse than they looked, and without asking questions, nobody would ever know how diverse that class really was. The second point is about creating, and I'm talking about creating a community that acknowledges, embraces, and celebrates everyone. I think sometimes that's what's missing in that, you know, and I'm talking about from my experience of working as a teacher. I worked as a teacher in a primary school. I trained as a secondary school, second language Welsh teacher, and I have also done supply teaching and worked as a pastoral mentor. And I think sometimes we remember maybe to give information, but not to celebrate and to allow children to feel seen and heard culturally. I know for myself, as the only Black child in my school at times, and definitely always the only Black child in the class, my ethnicity was pretty much ignored because at the time, I think teachers felt that was the polite thing to do, was pretend that I was the same as everybody else, when of course my life experiences were not. And so that again, this is something important to remember, that when we're lesson planning, that we incorporate, because you're creating all the time. So that's not, I wouldn't say that's extra work, but when you are doing your lesson planning, is that you remember to also celebrate. And that leads me on to the next point of empathizing. I have seen some very well-meaning ideas for work in classrooms, which were really traumatizing for children. For example, in a secondary school, you know, one teacher thought it would be a good idea to have children make slavery posters and put them on the wall. Now, of course, everybody in the class was white and had no links to America or the Caribbean, where slavery would be part of their ancestry. But had I been a child in that class, I don't know if I'd have wanted, well, I definitely wouldn't wanted to set foot back in that class. And I don't know if I'd have wanted to go back to the school, because, you know, that is really almost a celebration of the negative. There's also other examples of teachers showing pictures of people being lynched in America, where they've just got somebody, a Black man who's been beaten up and just hanging from a tree. So I would ask you that while these are subjects we need to talk about, to be mindful of how you deliver. These stories need to be told, but, you know, just remember things like slavery. Is it actually Black history? Is the slave trade really Black, just Black history? And what was the history of Black people in Britain and Wales before slavery and after slavery? And can we make our stories and lessons more Welsh centric as well, instead of always talking about Rosa Parks or Martin Luther King? So all of this hopefully will lead to change, and that all children will feel safe and seen within your classrooms, and that you can help to change stereotypes. I mean, at the moment, Islamophobia is a real problem within the community, and we hope this is something that is being addressed and seen within our schools. Now, as I said earlier, the responsibility shouldn't always just be with schools. As somebody who works in media, I understand that media is responsible for a lot of the issues that society face. And so one of the things we've been doing in S4C is working with schools and with universities. And we have worked on the Brethyn Cymru project, which is a resource available to all schools. At the moment, the poster's gone out to all primary schools, I believe. I think it has been rolled out to secondary schools as well. But it shows the history of Black and brown and minority ethnic people in relation to Wales. Every person in this project has links to Wales. They are Welsh people. Another project that we've been a part of is the Pecyn Addysg and Addysg Neges Heddwch, which last year now, which was about anti-racism. And this pack is available on the Urdd website, where there are actually not lessons, because you're the experts, you're the teacher, so we're not dictating how you should teach them, but there are lesson activity ideas that you can do with the kids and feel confident that it's something the kids will enjoy, and it's something that can help us towards an anti-racist Wales by 2030. So if you haven't seen them already, please have a look, and I hope that you enjoy them. So again, within our content in S4C, we try to support education as much as we can. Well, as a broadcaster, our remit is not to be the educators, but we would like to make sure that we are including content that can be used within classrooms. So some of our content, for example, Hanch, has a lot of swearing in, a lot of references to sex. So for older kids, that could be quite educational, but obviously not suitable for younger children. And so we find sometimes that we have a gap between Hanch and Q. And so we're very much open to ideas from you guys. I will give you my contact details at the end if you have any ideas or suggestions, or would like to make any contact, or have a visit the school for any reason. But here's some examples of programs that have been on recently. Teulu Dada Fi is where Connor Howard and his father Wayne Howard visit Jamaica. So it's a really good program for Welsh learners as well, because although it's a Welsh program, obviously when they visit Jamaica, a lot of it is in English as well, and there are subtitles that can help. Windrush Rhwng Dau Fyd, Windrush Between Two Worlds. I was actually a contributor to this programme, and Emily Pemberton is of Jamaican Welsh descent and lives in Cardiff. And this is like another perspective. It's a documentary programme again, but something that I know some schools have used already and really enjoyed. And then, of course, there's Dom and Lloyd, the Welsh rappers. And then I realised that for children, that teenagers these days, they like TikTok, they like fast, short, punchy videos and clips. And so A Corridor has been a fantastic Welsh language short programme. But the difference with this, it's not specifically about being black or brown, but it has that representation in it that young people need to see, where you have a main. Oh, sorry, I've been told time is up for my session. So I'm really sorry if I've gone over time. I'm going to ask Uzo to jump in and say a quick word about the new steps for processing racism within education, which is something we are writing together. Thank you, Uzo.
Thank you very much. I think we'll bring that very much to the end, and also we will share those with you because it's very much in guidance mode at the moment. We're still about to go out on consultation with that document that gives you a step-to-step response on how you can address and tackle racism. We don't believe that we can just suggest it as people with lived experience of racism. We need to make sure that this something that will work for schools and work for the people, families that their children have been affected by racism. So we will come out to you and we will share this links with everybody who is on this screen. I sincerely apologize for the problems that we've had with presentation. If you've registered for this event, we will have your contact. So we will email you the slides from today's session so that you're all connected and updated. Sincere apologies for any hiccups, and we're still trying to bring more people in. It should hopefully resolve itself. Thank you, Natalie. I will share the information for your review at the end of the session. So now we're going to have the representative from the Muslim Council of Wales. We know how awful it has been since Stockport for young people. There was a lot of outcry against Muslims, against people in particular wearing hijabs, the kind of awful attacks that children have highlighted to us. So Mo is the Director of Curriculum. I lead youth training for Muslim Council of Wales, and he's going to share some tips on how you can address and manage racist incidents affecting Muslims? Thank you so much.
Professor Uzo, thank you. Good morning, everybody. And Professor Uzo, thank you for putting this together. Really important and valuable conference and get together. And I don't envy you. The work of doing the tech behind the scenes, for a handful of 10 people is humongous. So you got 240 odd people. So yeah, I don't know how you're keeping your head on at the moment, but well done. Good morning, everybody. I recognize a lot of faces and a lot of names in schools. So it's really nice to have everybody here. And for those who know me, Boredar, good morning. And for those who don't, my name is Mohammed Alamgir. I am from the Muslim Council of Wales. The Muslim Council of Wales is an umbrella organization representing all 60,000 Muslims across the whole of Wales through the institutions like mosques, madrasas where they learn Quran and Arabic, and the charities. One arm of the Muslim Council of Wales is a training arm and a youth arm, which is what I'm responsible for. It's called iLead. It's been going for 15 years and essentially trains young Muslims from our community to become the next generation of Muslim Welsh leaders. We partner with the Prince's Trust, we partner with the Cardiff Vale College, and there are cohorts of 14 to 17, and then 18 to 25, and then adults, young adults. So that's the background, the context in which I'm speaking to you from. But I want to thank Natalie for her really insightful introduction. And it's always hard to go first, but I think you've set the standard there, Natalie. Certainly have the slides. I haven't got any slides, so you'll be looking at myself. But thank you for that. But I'm going to switch the angle a little bit now from where Natalie was talking from, and bring 3 incidents. These are real live case studies about what happened in school. This is real stuff. But before that, I want to give you some context. I grew up in 1985. I went to school in 85 onwards, where racism was not acceptable. It was never acceptable to be racist. However, the slurs were acceptable. There were certain things that you could say which were on the borderline, but it wasn't that bad, and so therefore you'd get away with it. And ultimately, today they would be racist. Today there would be no standing for it. However, those slurs, they make a psychological impact on an individual. Especially when that individual is an isolated individual. So as a young brown Asian Muslim boy in a predominantly white school, those slurs had impacts on me, and they drive the work that I do now. So if you understand the work that I do now, which is to do with equality, diversity and inclusion, and is all pro bono, is purely from that drive, the drive of not having another person to go through some of the feelings of slurs. So case study number 1. A high school in Cardiff, and these are from the iLead delegates. These are real life things from the delegates or their parents. I'm just checking this. Yeah, I'm just reading the chat there. Hopefully everybody can hear me. I think they can. So these are for real life experiences and real life incidents. A Cardiff school in Cardiff High School had 2 boys fighting, so like 15-year-olds, and they'd gone into not a physical fight at this stage. It was an altercation. You as teachers know what they would be like. Whatever, they'll be shouting at each other, and maybe a bit of pushing and a bit of egging on from the friends from either side. It hasn't gone into a physical altercation yet. The boy number 1 is an Asian Muslim, and the boy number 2 is a white male. Don't know about his faith. The white boy calls the Asian boy a monkey, and in a really aggressive, I'm not going to speak to you, you're a dirty whatever monkey. Teachers intervene, and both boys are hauled up. They're both disciplined because they shouldn't have been fighting and arguing. And the incident is left until the boy goes home to tell the parent. And only then, after the parent raises a huge, a complaint that goes to the governors, does the matter get taken seriously. And one of the reasons I'm raising this is because the word monkey, it's bad, but if you're a black or Asian man or person, it really hurts. It hurts inside. And I think that pain can never be understood if you're not from that community or from that color. So it was only understood after a letter that was sent to the head teacher and the governors, and it almost had to just lay it out. And it wasn't the school's fault. They did take it seriously, but they just didn't understand the impact of that word to that boy. Case study number 2. This is in a Welsh primary school, again in Cardiff. So again, the Muslim community and the ethnic minority community as well. We take education seriously, and we understand the value and the importance of the Welsh language. And my children originally went to Welsh school as well. However, Welsh schools are predominantly made up of white children. We can't get away from that, and it's down to our communities to ensure that our children are going to those schools and ensuring there's representation there. However, these are only youngsters. They're about 4 years old, toddlers, 4 or 5 years old youngsters, like year 1 or 2 they would be. 3 boys, sorry. One is brown, Asian, and the other 2 are white. And the 2 of the boys innocently, I will say innocently, say to boy number 3, who's of an ethnic minority background, an Asian background, we can't play with you because you are a different color. Now again, like, it's innocent, and it wasn't probably meant in that way at all by the youngsters, and it's just an education piece. But it's the impact of that by the teachers, or what that's understood by. We as a youngster, we need to be taking that very, very seriously for the youngster who's going to be impacted and traumatized by that word. Uzo, how are we looking for time? Sorry.
Oh, you're okay. You're finishing at 10:30, so that's
perfect.
fine.
I'll be done before then. We'll bring it back to you all before then. And then and so those 2 incidents are being raised, and I'll tell you what I'm trying to get at here is that I'll never be in a position to understand what it's like to be an educator or in the education field, and I'll never say this is what you should be doing. However, I can say that essentially the pain, the feeling, the trauma, the sensitivities, that cannot be understood unless you're from that community or you're from that background. So there may be areas where perhaps we can put together like not a disciplinary committee, but like a review committee or a review, to review these incidents and understand, have people from those communities there, whether they are teachers, and I understand there's a shortage of teachers from our community anyway, but whether they're governors, and again, I understand there's a shortage there. So perhaps teachers, or perhaps people from this, from what Professor Uzo brought together, subject matter experts who can go through some of them. Let the school do their thing. We're not trying to intervene there, but to really understand and bring together what those incidents mean and how they can be handled better or more efficiently, or more recognized for the youngsters, because again, they are traumatic and they have a traumatic impact on the adult that comes out of that school. And evidence of that is myself, and I probably speak on behalf of everybody else, that you can remember vividly those incidents when they happened, and they would have been 25, 30 years ago for me. The final area that I want to bring up is again, a very sensitive issue. And I think, and again, this is where I will say, perhaps teachers need to understand where the lines are, and, the pain that could be caused. This is a geography teacher. There was example comes from a geography teacher in another school in Cardiff again. And in this classroom, there's a discussion now around the war in the Middle East, in Israel and Palestine. And there are people who are affected by that directly because they're from Palestine, or their families are from Palestine, or their friends are from Palestine. And there are people impacted by that probably less so. I know that the Jewish community here in Wales is a smaller one with an older population, so probably less young boys. But it matters on both sides. On both sides of the coin, there's trauma, there's pain, and there's real emotions there. There was a flippant comment by the geography teacher there's a war going on over a piece of land. She diminished Palestine to a piece of land. And, you know, I think she overstepped the boundaries there personally. Ultimately, for those who are from Palestine, that's their homeland. You know, it's not a piece of land. This is the homeland. And this is a politically highly sensitive, highly charged, I'm not going to use the word complex, but like complicated matter. Is probably one that either is discussed properly in classrooms or avoided altogether. And again, in all three incidents, what happens is this is what happens. And, you know, as a parent myself, I can vouch for this. It's not recognized and is not identified in the classroom by the teachers. You know, they do take it serious, but the actual impact of it is not understood. The child comes home and it's brought up, you know, is discussed. This is how it made me feel. This is what it meant to me. This is why it happened. You know, the reality of that, it comes in play. And then it's up to the parents to go and battle. And in 3 of those incidences, 2 of them just didn't bother. 2 of them just left it. And I asked them, well, why then? Why did you not do something more about it? I'm busy. I haven't got the time. This is just a battle I don't want to take on, you know, trying to explain this. And in one of them, it's like, I you know, they were speaking in their own language to me. I can just about speak English and explain the day-to-day activities of my child. How am I going to, you know, write this up in a nuance? How can I complain? The first incident, the parent was somebody that did write. They wrote to the school in an email. They wrote a formal letter to the headmaster and the governors, and they understood the school system. And when that happened, it was just a day-night response. It was so different. So ultimately, it's difficult for the parents when they comes home to like take that battle on in terms of what that means. How can we address this? What are the escalation points in school? You know, and the teachers are busy, and it takes a moment for them to stop. You know, that letter to the governors and the headmaster took a moment, made the teachers take a moment to stop and say, hang on, what's going on here? Really, this is more than just a little fight with a few words being thrown around. The second and third incidents I've described, they didn't have that moment because the teachers' parents just did not complain at the way or bring it to the attention of. And again, this is why I say that, you know, having a review committee, maybe meeting up once a month or once a quarter and bringing 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 incidents that have come up and occurred in the school, or even across a cluster or across a group of schools, you know, when that learning's there, then that default reaction to incidents like that will be better, and they will acknowledge the pain that that individual child would have met. So in summary, there, I did say I'm going to finish early, Professor Uzo, so that gives you a bit of time on either side to if there's any hiccups or any other speakers would like to speak a bit more. However, in summary, what I'd like to say is that we understand, the Muslim Council of Wales understands that there is a huge amount of work going on in schools, and the schools do take it extremely seriously. As young Muslims, they've got 2 layers of there's 2 layers they have. The first layer is that they are from a different ethnic background. They might look different. They're not white. You know, that's the one. But the second one, and again, another protected characteristic is their faith. And young Muslims are, you know, iLead is about being a proud Muslim in whatever place you are, environment you are, bringing your faith, you know, bringing your whole self forward all the time. Many young Muslims hold that back a little bit because of incidents around Islamophobia and misunderstanding of the faith. And unfortunately for the women in our community who choose to adhere to the headscarf, they're direct, not targets, but they're directly, very obviously Muslim, you know. So therefore, some consideration around those would be good. And then I'm going to end on this. iLead had a suggestion. It's good that we've got this many educators in one room. The iLead program was thinking of developing almost an info pack or a pack Because some of you will know from visits to the mosque where I've arranged, you come to the mosque in Ramadan, or you come to the mosque for a school visit with the children, you get a lot of insight. So would they be useful? And perhaps you can go back to Uzo and we can work on that if there is a demand for it. A pack perhaps, or a written document of some sort that outlines, the basics of the Muslims, some of the things they do, like fasting, prayers, wudu, which is the ablution of washing yourself before prayers, the time off needed for Eid, the headscarf, why they wear it, just something they're like almost like a reference point or a go-to pack. If you think that something like that would be useful, then please let Professor Uzo know, and I can give it to the young delegates on the iLead program as a project that they would work on, they would build, and then we would release it back to you. Right, Uzo, that's me done. And thank you very much, Professor Uzo, for everything you're doing. And it's
You're
really
amazing.
hard. Thank you.
Mo, we think the world of you and the Muslim Council of Wales and the role of your education of young people and schools. Thank you for contributing today. Please, everyone, will share contact details of all the speakers, Mo's details, so that you can engage with the Muslim Council of Wales. They're doing amazing work. I'm just going to invite Natalie back. Thank you for giving a bit of your time to us. Natalie can share the suggested way that Race Council Cymru and our connected groups like Black History Wales and Black Lives Matter Wales Policy Forum, how they are asking for us to explore this issue of racism. So how can people actually address racism when it happens in schools? So give us your feedback on this. We'll also share it with you after the slides. Over to you, Natalie, just for until 10:30. Thank you.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, so can everybody see the slides there? Can you see them, Uzo? Yeah.
Yes, they can be seen. Yes, they are.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I've started first with the sort of headlines for the process. Now, these processes, most of them are what you'll already be doing, so they're not additional, but they are very victim focused. And from my experience of working in schools, generally when there's an incident to do with racism, the focus is on the perpetrator and course punishment, which of course there needs to be consequences, but we're realizing that children, my own son in fact has struggled with this as well, that sometimes schools are not coming back to us as families and saying what happened in the end, or how it, you just can't, you make your complaint, the school promises to deal with it. Quite often they do deal with it, but we don't hear how, and we don't hear anything afterwards. And also a lot of school staff members are not aware that these incidents should be reported to your local authority so that they have a record of it as well. So what we thought was it'd be really good for us to create some simple steps that are easy for schools to follow, are in alignment with what you already do, and also in alignment with what is legally required, so that you're not left wondering, did we deal with that properly or not? Dyna'r syniad. So if you have any issues, of course, with these, or anything you'd like to add, then please do, because they are in draft at the moment. So the first thing is to listen and believe. So quite often, because I know what it's like, especially with little kids, when they're all, so-and-so's done this, so-and-so's done that, it's really easy to go, oh God, now I'm trying to do a lesson, I'm trying to do this. We are asking to listen and believe, because as Mo just said, the impact of racist comments, even in small children, is huge. It is massive, and it has, I can say from personal experience, that it has a huge effect on self-esteem, which then has a knock-on effect on how you perform in school academically as well. So yeah, so we always say listen and believe, but then we say investigate and biasly. So you might be wondering, well, which one is it? But the child, quite often, it will take a lot of guts, it will take a lot of confidence to have told anybody what happened, because actually as Black and brown people, we're used to nobody actually doing anything about it. And most of these incidents will not be reported. So when somebody does, it really does need to be taken seriously, because chances are, if they've mustered the courage to tell somebody, it has really affected them and it is really serious. And then we'd ask, of course, that you follow your safeguarding process. Now, this is something that doesn't happen very often. People forget that if you have suffered trauma through racism, you will need to be supported emotionally, and that's why we would ask you to follow your own school safeguarding process at this point, and not to forget about it, and not to wait for an outcome to be supporting that staff member or child. And then to action your consequences and continue the support for the child, and to communicate with both families at every step. And as I say, don't leave the family hanging, wondering, has the school dealt with this or not? Because we're all so busy in schools, that's what happens a lot of the time. That's the reality. And so, again, for your relationships with that family going forward, it's really important that that communication, that somebody's put in charge of keeping that communication open. So Race Council Cymru have a wonderful, wonderful resource available to you. They deal with hate crime. They help with every step of a hate crime as well. Jo Muksumak King is the head of that department, and she has helped myself and other people that I know. So if the school is really struggling to support the child as well, again, Race Council Cymru are there to help you and to be a support. So I've put their email address on there. I don't know what this will look like going forward, because it's in draft. But as I said, remember the Equality Act. It is a legal requirement to record within the school and to report to your local authority. And then when it has been investigated, as Mo said, sometimes things are said without intention to hurt anybody. But it doesn't mean that they don't hurt somebody. So that needs to be kept in mind during the investigation. And we need to be thinking about how we can prevent it in the future, of course. So that's less work for you later on as well. And as I said, following your own safeguarding process. But again, when it comes to communication, we need to make sure that every staff member in the school is aware of what the head teacher and the teachers and the governor's expectations are. And one of the ways that some schools have been doing this is by signing up to the Zero Racism Wales website and having an assembly with all the children, and really making this an active part of some of your lessons. So if you haven't signed up to this yet, please have a look at it. And again, it's another way that we found that we can support you as an organisation. So sorry, I keep talking about two different hats. I talk about S4C and I'm talking about Race Council Cymru. But as from a point of view of both organisations, we want to support you as much as we can on this journey. So thank you for listening to me again. And I hope this is helpful. And I know that when it's finalised, you will all be offered a chance to read through it and to have it handy, and hopefully it's not too wordy as well. So if you have any suggestions or comments on these last 3 slides, please do send us your feedback. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natalie. We're hoping to send you a designed version of these slides. If you can stop sharing that would be helpful. Thank you. So we will share those to all of you who have registered via the Eventbrite, the actual slides that suggest step-by-step action. What we want to say is that at the point that a child reports to you as a teacher that they are being racially targeted, it's a trigger point in law. You have to do something about it. You have to take it seriously. You have to treat that child with the absolute utmost care and respect. So it's important that if you need support, give an email to Race Council, info@Race Council Cymru. We can signpost you, we can share information with you that might help you in dealing with that situation. and also you're going to hear from others. Coming up right now is Professor Charlotte Williams, OBE. She's an emeritus professor from Bangor University, and she'll be working on this particular presentation with Amy Grimwood from Aberconwy School, who's the winner of the Betty Campbell Award of 2024. Over to you, Professor Charlotte Williams, and we'll pick up later. Any questions, pop in the chat. Thank you.
Bore da pawb, diolch yn fawr iawn am y gwahoddiad. I am delighted to be here and to make a small contribution with Amy Greenwood, as Uzo has described, is the winner of our Betty Campbell Award. I want to reiterate what's been said many times already and what will be said many times today, that racism in our schools is significant and it's persistent. I don't think you will find a black or brown child or child with some kind of different status that won't have had some incident or other at school, which is a shocking and a horrible statistic. But racism has many dimensions and many manifestations, and I think what I want to stress today is that it's harming all children, all our children, whether they're white, brown, black, or have some kind of status that makes them distinctive in some way. One of the four purposes of the curriculum is to enable children and young people to become ethical and informed citizens of Wales and the world, able to make ethical judgments and behave in ways that reflect good values in education. So this is an issue for all our children, and it's an issue for the culture of the whole school. We know there's a great body of evidence telling us about the experience of minority children in schools. The Children's Commissioner report, our Cynefin report, Estyn have a handle on it and have reports to them about racism and racist incidents in schools. I do want to say something that, and reiterate something that Natalie has already said, and that this is an issue for all schools, irrespective of the demography of the school. And I live in North Wales, and this is often been called a predominantly white area. And there are some significant and particular issues for children and young people from minority communities in such areas. They're often, as Natalie pointed out in terms of her own experience, just ones and twos in a classroom. And this is very, very hard for them to navigate. And I can tell you from my own experience, it adds a layer of anxiety, a constant layer of anxiety for these children and young people. Not only about their peers and what their peers might say in the school grounds, but about your teachers and about other members of staff and how they will respond and what they will have to say on something. And it's often what we might call unintended or banal comments that can do so much damage. Asides, kind of misinformation, negative images of Black and minority communities. And in the literature, we call this being part of what we call a visibility and invisibility axis. You're very visible for negative connotation, and you're very invisible in terms of positive references and positive and inclusive kinds of content. So my tip number one is that to look beyond the demography, to look at the culture of the school, because being proactive and crafting a culture in which there is trust, in which pupils feel they have a voice, that their voice is amplified and that they can come forward and speak about issues affecting them, is much, much more important than anything else, crafting that kind of culture. I think another key point I want to make is what we call an incident and how we define an incident. And this is even before we get to the reporting and recording stage, which Natalie pointed out is often neglected. We might be talking about your hairstyle. We might be talking about your hurtful comments about your food. We might be talking about hurtful comments about some kind of religious observance that you do. Just being seen as different can communicate unbelonging. And these kinds of everyday incidents that are part and parcel of the culture of the school are very, very damaging to all children. So thinking about what an incident is and thinking about how that's recorded is very, very important. It was clear to us when we did the Cynefin report that schools were not reporting and recording sufficiently, and this is something that I think the guidance that RCC are developing will be very important. Now, I think it's important to speak with somebody who's working on the ground in these issues, and I'm very proud that in my area, Aberconway School, Amy Greenwood won the Betty Campbell Award this year, 2024, and I've invited Amy to have a small conversation with me about how their school approaches these incidents, and I hope that you can pick up some tips from what Amy has to say. So can I invite Amy to join me now?
Thank you, Charlotte.
You're there.
I'm here. Yeah.
See you. Amy, can you just remind us what the Betty Campbell Award is and tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so for the Professional Teaching Awards Cymru, the Betty Campbell Award is a category for a member of staff who has worked to promote the contributions and the perspectives of Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. This was the second time that the award has been awarded. The first was in 2022.
Wow, wonderful, and many, many congratulations.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit of about the demography of this area and about Aberconway School, the profile of your school.
Okay, so our school is in Conway. It is what you would call a predominantly white area, and 96% of our students are racialised as white. So when the role that I've been doing in the school for the past 2.5 years, as well as teaching, is to be the lead professional of anti-racism. And when this role began, at that time, we didn't have any separate structures in place to deal specifically with racist incidents towards between students. Things were coming under the term of bullying, but wasn't being dealt as a separate child protection issue, as racism now is within our school.
And is your school sort of typical of schools in Conway and Gwynedd?
In terms of the kind of demographics of our school, I would say very similar to the schools that I trained in that respect in the area, and staff that I've spoken to in other local schools. I think we've got a lot of similarities.
Mm-hmm. Can you give us an idea? You know, I mentioned some of the kinds of manifestations, but can you give us an idea of what kinds of incidents may occur in a school in this region? Yeah,
so initially when I began working on this job, it was quite difficult to get students to build up a sense of trust with me that they would disclose the incidents that were going on. So for the first, I'd say 6 months, there were white students reporting to me things that had happened to their friends on their behalf. The kind of things that were going on was there was a lot of microaggressions, a lot of targeting, that when you spoke to the student who had used that language or said that term, they would dismiss their own behaviour as, quote, banter, and not fully understanding the difference between the language that they would use to play about with friends and what was actually slurs or even a hate crime. And then there was few occasions of more overt racist incidents that were a different category altogether.
And, you know, one of the things that we haven't mentioned today, but I think is very significant, is that when an incident is reported, a teacher is faced with the sort of sense that, well, I must be racist because I've done something that's produced this complaint. And then the immediate reaction would be to go into kind of defensiveness, you know.
Yes. Yeah, there was a lot of defensiveness that we got from students and their parents. One of the first things I did when starting the role was actually invite parents of our students who were from Black, Asian and minority ethnic backgrounds to come in and speak to me. And they opened up not just about the experiences that their children have had since primary, but also their own experiences through school. And that helped me gain a real insight as to the emotional impact, and therefore any decisions that I was making in how we were dealing with incidents needed to be at the consultation with the person who was the victim and who was experiencing the emotional damage and ramifications from the action, which helped me broach to instances from a victim-based perspective initially. Then when dealing with the defensiveness from students and parents, a few things that we put in place to support with that is the consequences of the behaviours became a learning opportunity. So we had very structured sessions that the parents of the student who had committed the racist action could join as well if they wanted to. After school, they could certainly see the documentations that we'd be looking at with the students, and framing that as an education experience for that student and teaching them about something that perhaps they didn't know about and didn't have the awareness of before they committed the action, which definitely helped diffuse some of the situations of defensiveness when we explained fully the reasons why we were taking the action that we were and what exactly that action would look like.
So in terms of sort of specific examples, you know, what kinds of things come up?
So we had a series of months where there was social media was causing big problems. So our school now has phones in yonder pouches, so they don't have access to them during the day. But before this happened, we would get people taking sneaky photos of students, posting them on Snapchat or something, with comments that were racial hatred. And again, they would say things like, "But that's my friend, it's banter." And some instances the victim would say, "They are my friend," and so there's an extra emotional impact of that happening. And adding to group chats to say, you know, mean things, or adding them to a group chat for that reason. Stepping away from phones and social media, there would be a lot of kind of subtle comments in class that would be, so for example, during a cookery lesson, the teacher was doing a lesson where they were she was teaching them how to make chapatis, and one of our students who is of Indian heritage walked in the class, and then we were all saying, "Oh, you'll be good at this, won't you? You must make these all the time at home." And instantly she said it was just all eyes on me, and she felt, you know, very exposed by that. So some of them, it's instances where students are making comments that they're not filtering, or they're not emotionally sensitive to how that may make someone feel.
Absolutely. Recently I visited my old school to give some input on some literature, and I was very aware of those children from minority backgrounds, just ones and twos. Their eyes were down, and, you know, they were kind of in on themselves, because I think they thought that, you know, my being there was somehow going to make them more conspicuous. So that's what I mean about having to constantly navigate these situations. It leads to a lot of anxiety for children and young people. So let's think about some practical tips now to share with educators based on your experience, Amy.
Okay, so the main thing that has helped me massively in this role is having frequent communication with parents. As I say, we invited parents in who were from Black, Asian and minority ethnic backgrounds, and we've kept in regular contact with them in terms of every kind of guidance and policy that we create for the school, and in consultation with them about the new curriculum, and they have been seriously invaluable to supporting the work that we're trying to achieve at the school. And also our students who were perhaps hesitant to share with us their experiences, seeing their parents come in, and sometimes they've sat with their parents, has encouraged them to talk and open up more as well, which has been empowering for those students, and feeling like they're involved in the action that we're taking as a school. And consulting with them regularly has been really helpful. We also report all of our racist incidents through My Concern, so we've got that record there of this as a child protection issue. And therefore it can be dealt with the appropriate structures within the school. We've used the DARPL documentation about eradicating racism in learning organisations to help structure our policy writing, and having, as I mentioned earlier, a consequence that is focused on providing a learning opportunity that is targeted towards the specific language that has been used in that instance, has been really helpful too. And communicating with both sets of parents honestly about what we're trying to achieve.
And maybe this is a bit of a controversial question. Sometimes I feel that these kinds of initiatives fall to just one or two people within a school. Can you say a little bit in concluding about your school's longer term commitment to resolving these issues? Because they are much bigger, as I said. It's about the culture of the whole school.
Yes, and I totally understand what you mean, and sometimes it takes a little while for things to gain momentum, but what we have done to secure that this becomes a whole school priority is we signed up to the DARPL Advocacy Network to begin with, which meant we were getting lots of support and structure from DARPL and guidance from them. But part of that is a 3-year plan, so we've created a 3-year action plan of short-term and long-term goals of what we want to achieve for a whole school, and it has become, anti-racism has become a whole school priority for us as a result, which means that every single member of staff will have a target, a professional target that is based on anti-racism. We're working towards whole staff training, training for the governors, and making sure that this is a priority across the whole school. So that was one big strategic decision that we made. But on a the more personal scale, I also set up at the school a book club where we would swap books about critical race theory, and we'd share books with each other that we've read, and Heard What You Said was a really big one for us, The Good Immigrant, and sharing these stories and talking to each other as staff members really helped, because it then made anti-racism just a topic of conversation that we were having regularly at lunch times and in the staff room, which helped bring it to the focus as well.
Oh, that's fantastic and great to hear, and a great advert for the importance of DARPL, which we will hear a little bit more from. And of course, I'm impressed by what you say about trying to build a culture in which it's comfortable to speak about these issues, in which you know, teachers as peers can support each other, is being very important. So diolch yn fawr iawn. Make the most of that Betty Campbell Award. I'm sure you will.
Thank you very much.
And we'll hand back now to Uzo. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you for inviting me to speak.
Thank you so much, Amy. Congratulations, and thank you, Professor Charlotte Williams. Absolutely brilliant. I just want Professor Charlotte Williams to highlight the new publication that is out now with beautiful edited short stories from anti-racist activists across Wales that people might want to read as a resource. Charlotte?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, all of this kind of literature that's coming to the fore, it's really very, very important and very useful to us all. So please, please inform yourselves, get reading, get hold of these documents, and we'll also look forward to the guidance that's coming out from RCC. It's going to make such a big difference to all. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you very much. I will share the link to that new document, that new publication that Professor Charlotte edited, and we'll add it to the link. Also, Natalie Jones has written the most beautiful children's book that is circulating. Everybody's talking about it. Natalie, can you share just a link in the chat as well to that book in case schools want to use that as a resource? It's really been brilliant because it's Welsh, and I believe that you would find it really interesting. So the next speaker now is Joanne Maximio King, who is our Director of Operations and leads for tackling racist hate crime. Joe, are you able to join and speak and share your slides if you can? Thank you.
Okay. I'm just trying to see if I can share my slides.
Okay. We can see
Can everyone
you.
see?
Yeah, we can see you. Yeah, that's it.
Brilliant. Okay, so my name's Joanne Maximio King. I'm the Director of Operations at Race Council Cymru. I am also the lead on hate crime for the charity, and I'm also a play therapist with PTUK. So I work with ethnic minority children who have faced trauma. So Race Council Cymru, for anyone who's not aware, is my slide moving? Okay, so Race Council Cymru, for anyone who is not aware, we're an overarching umbrella body established by ethnic minority grassroots communities throughout Wales. We bring key organisations together to combat racial prejudice, race discrimination, harassment, victimisation, abuse, violence, and we promote anti-racism. So if I give you a little bit of a background, so there is a number of documents that you can look at that look at racism previously. So in 2012, the Race, Equality and Racism in Wales report was undertaken by Professor Heather Crawley, and it first coined the term everyday racism. And this term is now being picked up by the Children's Commissioner in a recent report. Following that, there was a report on the experiences of racism and race in schools in Wales, and that was conducted by Race Council Cymru, East, Trosgynnal Plant and Show Racism the Red Card. That was in 2018. The paper was sought to present an up-to-date picture of the experiences of Black, Asian and minority ethnic pupils in schools from across Wales, and it drawed on the expertise of key charities in Wales working with Black, Asian and minority ethnic young people, including the Gypsy Traveller young people. In 2022, the Race Equality first commented that there was a rise in racism. However, many schools denied at that point that this was happening. And then we've got a report conducted by the Children's Commissioner for Wales in November 2023 that found that racist abuse was a regular occurrence in schools, with many pupils normalising these incidents. We can also see by hate crime figures throughout the year that hate crime is impacted by community relations. If there is any recessions, conflict, rioting, the rise of the far right, this will escalate issues with Black, Asian and minority ethnic people, and we usually see a rise in hate crime, a rise in racist incidents. So there's an interconnection there that it would be really useful for schools to monitor their local communities and look for these different pockets of external issues that are happening and how they can impact on your pupils within the school. So in order for us to look at today, I wanted to be able to do a little bit of research. So I've conducted a survey with parents who whose children have been impacted by racism in schools. And I thought I wanted to ask them lots of questions around, you know, what happened? Was it a positive experience? Was it a negative experience? Because I wanted to be able to share it with you. But this research is ongoing, and hopefully we'll be able to draft a report on it that we can share with you in a couple of months. But I think there's going to be some really good findings from this that you can utilise. So I wanted to know, within the school, where were the highest incidents of racism? And the highest were in year 8. Reception class came next, which I was quite surprised about. Then we jumped to year 9, we jumped to year 7. And then following on from that, there was year 4 and then year 11. So when I asked the parents regarding racism, sorry, Uzo, I'm going to have to minimise this. I can see your face in the corner, sorry. 81.58% of parents spoke to the school regarding the racism. There was still a small minority of parents that didn't want to speak to the school. So I will capture some of that information next, because that was one of the things that I wanted to look at, is why people do not report. And we know when we look at hate crime, there's still a high minority of people who do not report instances of hate crime. It's very rare for me to have a phone call regarding racism from someone who has been impacted that day. Quite often people will come to me and they'll say 3 months ago, 6 months ago, a year ago, sometimes 2 years ago, and they'll give me a build-up of a picture that has been happening for a number of years. And it's quite, you know, upsetting for me. I find it quite upsetting. I always say every case that comes forward, I'm continuously surprised by what these people are experiencing. And then 21.88% of parents were happy with how the school dealt with the racism. So I wanted to explore that a little bit more too. My slides do not want to move. So I wanted to know from parents, can you tell us more about what happened to your child? So I wanted to have a bit of a picture about what was happening within the school. So there's a couple of quotes here that I've had. One parent said that the child was bullied in class, they were treated differently by a teacher, issues were ignored by the teacher despite escalating complaints and getting third-party support. The child ended up having to move schools as clear issues would not be recognised or addressed. The next person had 2 children who had experienced racism. So the eldest was now at university, and they were told by a teacher that he could see her hips pointing out of her uniform. She had to sit through the reading of the N-word over and over again in English class, and she was kicked off a school bus by a student who said no N's allowed on this bus. Her other child was told several times, go back to your own country, immigrants should be shot. They were also told your mum is a good immigrant, and I was following a mock election campaign that was held within the school. The next quote said, my child was called a terrorist as well as other names, and had been physically attacked when teachers stood and did nothing because they didn't want the children to turn on them.
Yeah.
So
no, I put it back in the sack, don't play, yeah.
So the child has had their belongings.
We don't know how much it
destroyed.
is, do we?
I put mine in. I don't know how much mine is.
Please, could I ask that everybody mute? Could I ask that everybody mute themselves, because your conversations are coming through? Thank you.
So there was a further number of comments. One person said that their child was treated differently from other children and was left out alone to figure up his learnings. Others said always being called bad names, making fun of their curly hair or black skin, telling them to go back to their own country. Another child was bullied and called unprintable names. And another person said, my son was told by another Muslim child that his religion, Christianity, was dirty. And it seemed like a rhetoric picked up from the Israel-Palestine conflict. So I asked parents, why did you not speak to the school? So one person said, because it was the school staff that were doing it to my child, I didn't know what to do and I had to leave the school in the end. She always came home with complaints like that all the time. So it will not change anything. That's what I thought. And my child said there's no point, there's nothing would be done to them. It's definitely he had seen it happen to other children and nothing was done. One boy continued to attack even in the park after school. The child was walking home. There was no one that they could approach for help, and it was a child that was the same age as their own. So this is one person who commented, and I took all their answers and sort of combined it into a case study really. This happened within the last 6 months, so I thought it would be quite a good example to show. So child A lives in Swansea. They're Arabic and they're in year 8. And this incident has been occurring over the last 6 months. So it's quite a recent activity. Child A has been beaten several times at school during their lunch break, in the toilet, in the playground, in the PE class, and on their way home. They've also had their money stolen. Mum has had several meetings with the school, and her son was given permission to leave school 5 minutes earlier every day. This is to avoid the abuse that the child was experiencing on their way back home. However, the bullying has continued inside the school. There are times the teachers have refused child A to leave if he has forgotten his pass, because this coincides with the school data system. Child A feels supported by the teachers. However, the bullying continues and it's not being resolved. Child A is now getting to the point that they do not want to go to school. So I asked the parents, what are the positives of what the school have done and what are the negatives? And I hope this will be a really good learning experience and you might be able to adopt some of these going forward. So the positive is the school dealt with the complaint swiftly and took it seriously. There was space to hear the complaint, and people have said even having the police involved, that's had a really good positive outcome. Some people have said because the incident was reported, it never repeated, which is great. And it helped to raise racism or awareness about racism in the school, which some schools didn't believe existed before. However, there's a number of negatives as well. Some people have said no positives, all issues were dismissed, and I was accused of overreacting. The people felt that the school dealt with it too light. Some people said talk to the racist child, but nothing changed, it's still happening. Someone else had to move school. Every time a situation happened, it got brushed off and wasn't taken seriously. And it even ended up with the child in hospital. And their favourite phrase from the school was, boys will be boys. Another parent said that it's still continuing from year 7 to 9, so still an existing issue. So in order to address the effects of racism, it's important to note that many children will feel the effects of trauma and how it can have a significant impact on their cognitive, emotional, social and physical development. A lot of the children who come into the playroom, I said I work with diverse communities. A lot of those children are from ethnic minorities. A lot of them are asylum seekers and refugees. And there is definitely a delay in their development, which has been caused by trauma. You can see it straight away. Whenever I look at trauma in a child, I will always go to the last semester of pregnancy. I'm a great believer that whilst the child was in the last semester and mum was pregnant, that trauma has an impact on that child, and that child will carry that trauma. So whenever I'm looking at trauma with children, I look at pre-existing issues. And I think we've spoken before about the effects of trauma on parents, and I'll talk about that coming forward. So racism and inequalities impact on children as much as any other adverse childhood experiences. And there is research out there that says that racism should also be an ACE, because it's equally as important as a huge impact on children. Many children from diverse communities may have already been exposed to trauma in early childhood, especially where they would have fled war or persecution. And definitely that trauma or those experiences need to be looked at. And children from diverse communities will also be exposed to secondary trauma. So when we say secondary trauma, we are looking at the trauma that would have been experienced by their parents, by their grandparents, by their siblings. And quite often in a lot of our communities, there will be maybe 2-3 generations living within a house. So it's to be mindful of the trauma being imposed or being reflected on that child from their parents, and how that's contributed to how they feel about themselves and about the, their religion or the colour of their skin. So there is a clip. I don't know whether I'll be able to show this, but no. Oh, hang on, it is playing. So this looks at white privilege, and you might have seen it. It was a Channel 4.
So sorry, Joe. Your time is literally up. It's 11:05. I'm so
Okay.
sorry, but could you share the link to that on
I
the
will.
on the group? Yeah.
I will, of course, yes.
Thank you so much, Joe. We're going to attach Joe's slides to what we send out via Eventbrite as well. So any of you who missed any of it or want to click on the video can do so. Immediately, I'm going to invite Chantal Horton, who's the director and founder of DARPL Wales and principal lecturer in early years education at the Cardiff Met, and a recipient of the British Education Research Association Equality in Education Award. And she'll be jointly presenting with Dean Pimble from Show Racism the Red Card. And they've just got a few minutes from their own conference that they're delivering today to be able to join us. So Chantal, are you here? Can you take over now? Thank you. Can you unmute?
Good morning, everyone. Bore da pawb. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Professor Uzo, for inviting us here today. You'll notice that Dean has done a quick switch with Lauren, who's with us here. Dean is in another room. Just to say thank you so much, Professor Charlotte and Amy, who is a real DARPler and DARPlet. We were watching, so there's about 200 of us here in Monmouth, an education squad who have been watching some of the highlights today, and one of the sessions they got to listen into was from Professor Charlotte and Amy, and they were really keen to hear about that. So Lauren and I won't stay. We're just giving a swift, fleeting visit, and we're very happy to see that you're here today as a huge group of people. We're happy, we're troubled though, and we're troubled that we are talking again about anti-racism in 2024. And I want us to be cautious about the word anti-racism and think about the overuse and casual use of that. I know within the context of this day that we can't listen into all of the conversations and top tips you'll be receiving, but anti-racism, when we're exploring it, we're talking about racism, and we're in our hats here talking about that in the context of education, childcare and play work, as well as some elements of youth and community. Anti-racism in the broader sense needs to explore Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, discrimination against our Gypsy, Roma, Romani traveller communities and our global majority heritage people in Wales. And within DARPL, we have a very small remit with a huge reach across Wales. And our focus is on diversity and anti-racist professional learning. So we've popped in to say, if you're not already DARPling with us, then please do. We'd love you to join Team DARPL in the context of free, high-quality professional learning. Amy referenced that she is part of the DARPL Enhanced Leadership Series, and also that she used the DARPL Eradicate Guide around reporting and non-reporting of racism. So we'd like to draw your attention to some of our research and our resources, and really to work with you. If you're not a member of DAN, the DARPL Advocacy Network, yet, please join us. If you're not yet signed up for the DARPL Enhanced Leadership Series, it's a powerful series that's co-produced and presented with a range of our partners in community of practice. In the South, we've currently got 50 head teachers and leaders within that, and our next intake for the Enhanced Leadership Series is in March. I'm not popping in to give any key messages because I think that we all are here because we believe, in the words of Maya Angelou, your legacy, our legacy, is every single life and family that we touch. And that brings us hope but expectation in anti-racist professional learning. We can't dive into thinking about decolonising a curriculum until we start thinking about re-indigenising, and also working towards an anti-racist leadership approach. So if you haven't yet looked at the Dartpool virtual campus, please do so. One of the things that came out yesterday was a set of blogs by 5 authors who pitched their work within Wales. Connor Allen, Jessica, Diana, and Dee Dee and Angela Hoy has shared some of their experiences about life in Wales, which are really valuable to read. We'll try and put some links together for you within the chat, but it's quite challenging because we've had to squirrel away in a cupboard, Laura and I, because we've got about 200 people that we're delivering to today. So the nutshell from me is Dartpool is here to support you, to challenge you, and we'd like to work with you if you're not already working with us. I'm going to hand over to Lauren, who's going to signpost to Show Racism the Red Card Wales offers a range of provision that's within Dartpool. They're a founding partner too, but also they work very closely with schools on the front line with the children, because we focus on professional learning. So Lauren, thanks, over to you.
Bore da, and thank you for having me. I am speaking on behalf of Dean Pimble, who is our campaign manager. I am the education worker for Show Racism the Red Card Wales, and I just kind of wanted to give you a little bit of an insight into what we do. Show Racism the Red Card are the UK's leading anti-racism education charity. Originally, a lot of our work was kind of football based. You know, we did do a lot of work with football in terms of using the power of role models and footballers to kind of promote that anti-racism message. And at the moment, it being our month of action, you may have seen some of the sort of promotion and within kind of the sport remit. But actually, whilst the branding and a lot of the stuff that we do is around football, the majority and the main kind of core of our work is education and anti-racism education. Like Chantal said, we do lots of work in schools, primary and secondary, with our young people, really kind of exploring the kind of topical things of what's going on today, and that I'm trying to make them anti-racist. And if anyone's ever interested in doing some workshops with us with our young people, we are highly flexible. We literally work with all sort of year groups, so please reach out to Show Racism the Red Card Wales. But not on top of that, we do lots of work in terms of adult education. So at the moment, a lot of our work is around educators, and that kind of alongside Dartpool and independently, we're doing a lot of adult education in terms of teacher education. So that's really going well. We're working with lots of local authorities within that, but we can certainly be contacted independently if that is something that is of interest within your teams and within your schools. It's a really valuable experience. We're doing lots of twilights, lots of insets as well. So like I said, there's loads and loads going on. Yeah, so like I said, that is kind of a brief input into what we do with Show Racism Red Card and of course of Dartpool. But is there any questions for us while we're here? But please, like I said, the Wales team at Show Racism the Red Card, please look us up online or contact us in sort of any kind of way on social media. There's lots of ways and means of getting hold of us.
From a Dartpool perspective, we've got a few minutes left before we leave. Is there any questions that you'd like to take from us? Whilst we've got a few minutes, we've got to leave at 11:20 precisely because there's a workshop starting in a minute. But we'd love to have any questions or thoughts from the group, because we're focusing really on the opportunities for professional learning in the Dartpool context and what you'd like to ask about that in particular.
Can you put your electronic hands up if you do want to ask a question for just a few minutes? We are approaching the question and answer time, and we'll be putting up a couple of slides to help us with that before our next speaker comes in. So do you have any questions for Dartpool? Anybody? Okay, no hands are up. No,
thank you so much. Thank you, Uzo. We're going to go back into the room now with the teachers, but they enjoyed the speech. So thank you all and good luck with the rest of the session. We look forward to hearing about how it is. And we're sorry we're hearing and missing hearing lots of things. See you soon.
Thank you. You do such great work, and we're wishing you all the very best, Chantal, and all the Dartpool team and Show Racism the Red Card. Keep flying that flag. We're delighted to have had you for a short while. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. So now I'm just going to invite Joanne back to put up the rest of her slide and finish off. And then if you have any kind of questions about anything's going on in your school that you might want to share and get some tips, please do. So Joe, if you can scroll past the video and see if you're able to get to the end of your slide. And then hopefully I can actually put up the draft guidance that we are consulting on for all of you to be able to have a look. Ty, if you could get up the new one after Joe, that would be great. So there's no volume on this. Joe, there isn't any volume on this. We can't hear any words. You're on mute. You have muted yourself, Joe.
Okay, let me play it again. Thank you. Can you hear it now?
No, we're hearing somebody saying stop it.
You can't hear it?
No.
Okay, hang on.
Is the slide your very last?
No, I can go to the last slide. I've put the link in the question and answer if anyone wants to watch it.
Okay. That's
Okay.
fine. Yeah.
So I'll cover the steps the school can take to address racist incidents. So above all, listen to the child. A lot of parents will contact us when they've tried to contact the school and they're feeling that the voice of their child or the voice of them is not being heard. So that comes out quite a lot, and that's where we will come in and support that parent to liaise with the school. Record and report the incident to local authority, but make a record as well. That's really important. And like I said earlier, a lot of people will come to us where there is historic incidents, and it's really important to look at what's happened previously, not just to look at what has been told, because quite often there are a number of things that have been happening over a longer period. And as I said earlier, no one comes to you on the first day of experiencing an incident. This is quite often a number of things that have happened over a period of time. Always be impartial, so be impartial to both parties and not think of how to behave, just as you would do with a safeguarding report, just take it like for like of what the child is telling you. Follow your safeguarding processes. As a school, you have a duty of care to that child. Follow through any consequences for the perpetrator and look at additional support for the child through counselling.
That makes so much noise.
So there is counselling available through the African Community Centre, and that's who I do the play therapy with. So there's people who can work with young people to address any trauma that they've experienced. And that's quite important as well, because that has a huge implication. As Mo said earlier, the impact of someone targeting you because of the colour of your skin is really, impactful for that child. It's something that they can't take away. So acknowledging that and recognizing that is so vital, and keep communicating with the families. A lot of the feedback from the survey was that parents weren't aware of what was happening, and I dealt with a case a number of years ago with a school up in North Wales, and unfortunately there was 3 children in the same school, and the grandmother phoned me, it was about 2 weeks ago, to say that the youngest child is now in the comprehensive school. Unfortunately, they live in a rural area, so they haven't got the choice that other children might have living within a city. So the child's had to go to the same school, and they said that they still haven't heard back about what happened 3-4 years ago when I first started working with the school and working with the eldest child. So it was me telling the grandmother what the outcome of that situation was, whereas I feel the school should have developed that relationship with the parent to look at what happened and to confirm to them what they were putting into place. So I don't think it was necessary for me to do it. The other thing is we are asking for our schools to call on the Cabinet Secretary to make racism childhood ACEs so that resources can be applied to help with their trauma. And that is quite vital. There's support around other traumas, but racism, unfortunately, is one of those things that isn't quite recognised yet as an ACE. And that's really important, I think, because it's just as impactful for a child. And that's it, thank you. I've got a number of resources on the next slide, but you can have that when you have a copy of my slides. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe. That's really helpful. So now here's the opportunity. If you can stop sharing, Joe, that would be helpful. Here is an opportunity for you to ask some questions. We're going to have our next speaker coming up at 11:40. So we've got 10 minutes for you to ask questions. Will be Professor Emmanuel Obona, CBE, and he's the Vice Chair for Race Council Cymru. He is also the leader who co-chaired the committee that wrote the Anti-Racism Wales Action Plan for Welsh Government, and he is currently the co-chair with the Permanent Secretary of the Welsh Government External Accountability Group for the Welsh Government's Anti-Racism Wales Action Plan. So it's going to give you a really full briefing. So get your pens ready to take some notes. And I wonder if anybody has any questions now around any school practice that they would like us to talk about or discuss. Any questions at all? Okay. Can you put your electronic hand up if you do want to ask a question or make a comment? Okay. While you're waiting.
Hi, Uzo. Sorry, I can't find your hand, but
yes, please speak up. Please speak up.
I just wanted to raise an issue that we raised in the inquiry last year about the safeguarding and providing support for children in schools experiencing racism. I'm still very concerned that there isn't anything in place for children to report unless the schools actively working towards eliminating racism within their setting. So I just wondered, what can we do to improve safe spaces for children to report and talk about their experiences?
That's really helpful. Thank you. Can any information from schools that are here, can you just type into the chat so that we can see? If you're able to type into schools, do you have safe spaces where people can come into your school to report racism? How would a child in your school be able to know who to go to? What are the leadership messages that are going out from your school telling children it's okay to report when things are going wrong for them, all those things? Okay, so it's really important. If you could type into the chat, that would really help us. Okay, Ty, can you put up the new? Could you put up the new slides with the guidance that was designed by Natalia, if it is possible? If you could put that slide up for us, it's just sent through on your WhatsApp. Or I'll send it to Joanne to share if you're not able. Okay, you are able to share it. Thank you. So as you don't have any questions, can I just have a look at this? Can I ask you to please have a look at these steps and just give us your thoughts? So you've heard them from Natalie before. Firstly, listen and believe, record and report to the local authorities, obviously something that we want to do. But first step, listen and believe the child, because it takes a lot of courage to for somebody to come and tell you that they've been racially targeted. My children were born in Wales and were born with other children in Singleton Hospital. And they sadly at the time were the only Black children in the whole school, and the terrible racism that they endured during their early years, it was absolutely horrific. I mean, my daughter was threatened by a white boy of being pushed off the Eiffel Tower because she kept winning the music awards. And my son was told they didn't want a Black person here locked in a toilet and attacked by 4 white kids and beaten for 40 minutes. You know, the level of racism that they experienced and we experienced as a family was extremely traumatizing. And many of our families are telling us that their children who are going through racist incidents are having to have cognitive behavior therapy, medication, antidepressants, antipsychotics because of fear. So it was David Olusoga that said at the BAME-Ed conference, which Sue James, who spoke earlier, organized with Lillian. When we met David Olusoga, he said, please be aware, racism is trauma. And these children continuing to be re-traumatized and expected to perform well in school, something seriously has to be done. So we're asking you to investigate it in an unbiased manner. Action, consequences, and support. There has to be a punitive element. There has to be also, I understand about learning, but there has to be a clear message from schools that racism will not be tolerated by that school. If that messaging is not going out regularly, people thrive in intimidating and bullying others. So record and report it to your local authority. Follow your own safeguarding processes. Communicate with families at every step. Can I have the next slide, please? Hi. Page 2. Thank you. So we ask you to listen and believe. When a student comes forward about experiencing racism, it is vital to listen carefully and believe them. In law, this is a trigger point. When somebody comes to you to say, I am being racially targeted by another child, legally there is a trigger point and you need to do something. You need to take it seriously. You need to believe them. You need to look at all the facts that they bring to you. Make a record of it. Find out who was there, if anybody was there, who else might have heard it. Investigate it impartially. Okay, avoid dismissing their feelings. Ensure the student feels safe to express themselves. Every case of racial discrimination and bullying should be treated with the utmost seriousness. Refer the parents of the alleged victim to Race Council Cymru or the African Community Centre. They have a counselling service. Now, it's important to say that Race Council isn't funded for this work. We work with volunteers, so often it is difficult to guarantee that support, but we will do our best and we continue to look for funding to do this on a more steady basis. But African Community Centre have a counselling service that is culturally sensitive and appropriate. So please contact us and we can connect you. Record and report to your local authority. Under our legislation, racism and hate crime must be recorded within the school and reported to your local authority promptly. Document key details such as what occurred, who was involved, any witnesses. In severe cases where the incident may involve a hate crime, report it to the local authorities, report to the police if need be as well, as schools are legally obliged to do so under the Equality Act and the public sector duty. Failure to report can lead to legal consequences and further harm to a victim. Then the third point is unbiased investigation. An investigation must be impartial and thorough, involving all relevant parties. All cases must be investigated with urgency and compassion. Keep in mind the well-being of the victim, ensuring that they feel supported during the process. And every staff member should receive training that ensures everybody is informed of expectations and steps that will be taken prior to an incident happening. Just to say that Natalie Jones, myself, Pastor Hadassah Radwin, Kechi Alan Dawson, Roshnara Ali, and a few others are trainers that work with Race Council Cymru on anti-racism. We deliver bespoke anti-racism training to schools, but we need to charge for our services. We're not able to do that free. So if you do want us to come in and deliver training, please drop us an email, or you can go to Show Racism the Red Card, or you can go to a variety of other organizations. If it's professional learning, DAPL services are available. But, we deliver training through Black Lives Matter policy initiative, and also through Black History Wales, which is now, as we know, embedded as permanent mandatory in the curriculum and in law. So please contact us to be connected up. Natalie delivers training for us as well through the medium of Welsh and English. We have to charge you as a charity for our services. So the next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so follow your own safeguarding processes. Many children report to us and parents that their children feel like taking their lives, that they're terribly bullied, they're terribly frightened, they don't want to go to school. This is affecting their education. Please follow your own safeguarding protocols. Ensure the school policies regarding safeguarding are followed, particularly if the victim is vulnerable. And if the victim is vulnerable, or if the incident involves ongoing bullying, racism can severely affect a child's mental health and well-being. So be prepared to provide additional support. In terms of action, consequences, and support, once the investigation concludes, take appropriate action against the perpetrator based on the severity of the incident. Consequences should align with school policies ranging from disciplinary action to involvement of external authorities if necessary. Equally important is offering ongoing support to the victim, including counseling or other pastoral care services. Then communicate at each step with the families, both the victim and the alleged perpetrator's family. Transparency is key, and throughout this entire process, keep the families of both the victim and the accused or alleged perpetrator informed at every stage. Open communication can help build trust and ensures all parties are aware of steps being taken to resolve the issue. So joining up as a school to the Zero Racism Wales pledge ensures that everybody is aware of expectations on how you can be anti-racist. Okay, is there a final slide, Ty, or is that the last one? There is one. Please pop it up. So firstly, I want to say that if you are in the position that you have a child that is terribly distressed, please go through your processes anyway. Make sure that that child has had the opportunity to air their feelings. And please, can I ask schools, don't rush to put the alleged perpetrator in front of a crying or distressed victim, because I remember the horror, the horrific experiences of my child calling me from a school toilet saying they have chased me out. I'm not allowed to sit on a bench that could fit 8 children. I've been told to sit on the courtyard. I've been told not to clear my plate after lunch until they finish eating, then I can go and clear my plate. I've been told that I'm so audacious words to that effect, that I keep on winning the music awards. Who gives me the right to win all the music awards? I better not, or I'm not allowed to come on the school trip. You know, words to that effect. And she was in this toilet, and the head teacher then calls me and says to me, "There is no bullying going on in my school." I said, "Yes, there is, because my daughter called you." Immediately called me, and what she said was, "Your daughter has broken the law. She shouldn't have access to her phone." Rather than, how is it that a child is so traumatized that they've hidden in a toilet and they're phoning their family for help? So instantly they kicked off with, "Oh, this is the policy of the school." And then they put my daughter in front of the victim, who she was terrified of and was unable to communicate. She was just crying. And the victim, the alleged perpetrator, was also crying and saying, "Why are you saying I did something when I didn't do it?" The trauma that my daughter has been through has severely affected her life. Cognitive behavior therapy, medication, and all those other things. We're trying to ensure that children from schools, at schools today, are not going to be going through what some of our children went through. I mean, Natalie, can you share some of the tips that you've gleaned from when you were, you know, in your school, and any information that you think people may find helpful?
Yeah, I think like a lot of the times with bullying, there's restorative practice, isn't there, as you said, but quite often in these cases, having the person who has made the slur or, you know, created the racial activity, and then asking somebody to sit in front of them while they say sorry doesn't work very well, and it actually can be even more damaging. And actually, I've been put in that situation as an adult within the school setting, where I was asked to face teachers that had been well, incredibly rude, actually. And then the teacher that had been rude to me started crying. So it wasn't helpful at all, because, you know, then the person who perpetrated the bad behavior behaved like the victim, and that's what happens a lot. So that's why we are focusing more on, I'm using the word victim here a lot, and I'm sorry, somebody has advised in the chat that we use the word target, which I quite agree with. I do prefer that, using target. But it is important to understand the psychological damage that can be done from either not dealing with it or dealing with it incorrectly. And so that's why I believe the safeguarding processes and pastoral should be followed. I've had incidents of bullying that I've had to deal with, that not necessarily racism, but you know, having that safe space. I was that safe space for a lot of children and pupils who needed to be able to talk freely and openly about what had happened without being judged. This is really crucial. It's really key. So always get advice. You know, you'd be surprised, people within the community, parents of children in your school, that most of them will be open to you asking for their advice and having conversations with them about things you're not sure about, or even discussing things before they happen. I've always been happy to discuss things with teachers and schools before I was working in the school environment. So, you know, I take Jamaican food in, teach Jamaican dancing, and talk about issues that maybe staff weren't clear on or sure about. So yeah, use your community, definitely.
Thank you so much for that, Natalie. There's just one question, and then we'll bring in our next speaker, our next and final speaker. So yes, can I hear from you, Leslie?
Hello. Yes, it is a question, really. So we have been supporting young people who are suffering racial incidents in a local comprehensive, and this has been going on for a year. We are reported to the police. We are now reported to the council, although they were involved, and the community cohesion team, DARPL, have been involved. But as a youth club offering support to young people who are ethnically diverse, we are outside of a school. Now, I'm really pleased to hear of all the and see all the people who are on this call who are obviously from schools and want to make a difference. But we are in a situation and we are dealing with a school which is dragging its heels, could we maybe talk about other things that we can do? We will be using those slides that you have shown and adding it to what we are doing. But yeah,
Thank you. Thank you, Leslie. Which organization do you come from?
East Ethnic Youth Support Team.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Leslie. We'll definitely share some thoughts on that right after Professor Emmanuel Obona has spoken. I'm hoping that he might even give us some tips on this. So it gives me great joy to warmly welcome the Vice Chair of Race Council Cymru, Professor Emmanuel Obona, who is a celebrated academic who is a lecturer at the Cardiff University and a national leader on anti-racism and has received a variety of awards, including recently by the King, a CBE, for his contributions to anti-racism in Wales. He is the co-chair, he co-chairs the Welsh Government's External Accountability Group, scrutinizing the implementation of the Anti-Racism Wales Action Plan. And he has done a variety, probably over 300 talks since, to talk about the key elements of the Anti-Racism Wales Action Plan. We're delighted that he's able to make the time. He rushed in from another conference. So a big thank you to Prof. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Uzo, and thank you for having me. I'm here today to talk about the Anti-Racist Wales Action Plan. So forgive me, I haven't been with you all morning, so it could be that some of the things I'm about to tell you have been said by other people, but that only emphasizes the importance of those things. But please forgive me if I appear to be repeating some of them. But I want to begin really by saying to you that everything that I know about racism, and I have researched racism in organizations from 2 years after I was awarded a PhD in 1990. And since then, my PhD was on organizational strategy and culture, and I began to study racism when the South Glamorgan Training and Enterprise Council and the then Employment Department asked me to do a piece of work to look into the outcomes from training in South Glamorgan. They had assumed that ethnic minorities were not coming forward to train. We did a study for them and found out that, in fact, ethnic minorities were more likely than their white counterparts to come forward to train, but were, in fact, achieving more positive outcome in the sense of qualification, but the ultimate positive outcome, which was a job, they were not achieving. And that was my induction, really, to research into anti-racism. So in all that time, I've reached a conclusion that other people have reached as well, which is that racism is a wicked problem. It's a wicked problem because it is multifaceted. It's very difficult for us to define it, to lay a hand on it, to be able to identify it, even to know that it exists, because the people that are in it, that are experiencing it, are probably the only people that know it exists. The people that are perpetrating it often explain it in other terms, and that makes it wicked. It is also wicked because, like a virus, it has the capacity to mutate, and we often see racism mutating. those people on the call that may have been alive in the 1950s and 60s would probably view racism in a different way from people today. You know, I remember during the pandemic and the Black Lives Matter movement was going on, and some older people were commenting and saying, well, there is no racism today. You know, people who lived in the 1960s would have seen what happened then. You know, the Enoch Powell speech, when they had signs on the streets and houses, no blacks, no dogs, and those types of things. And that's how they view racism. But we know that it's mutated today and it is more subtle. You know, it doesn't make it less of a problem. In fact, if anything, it makes it more of a problem because it's embedded in everyday life. So it becomes our reality in a sense. And of course, we now know that maybe the riots of earlier this year may have told us or is telling us that racism is on the move again, it's mutating again, and we don't actually know where this new mutation may end up. All the things happening around us here in the United States, where diversity is now a dirty word, and so on and so forth, may tell us that racism is mutating. And we have a role, a significant role to play in making sure that that mutation does not make it worse. If anything, that it makes it a better thing, that it becomes, racism becomes a word that is put out of use because we no longer have need for it. Why do I say this? I say it because we continue to have racialized outcomes in practically every area of life. You know, for the time that we've had statistics in, for instance, employment, unemployment, we know that ethnic minority people are twice as likely on average to be unemployed as their white counterparts. We go to schools and colleges and universities, education, if you like, which is the topic of today's lecture. And I can give you examples with higher education. And in higher education, Black and minority ethnic people are less likely to get the top grades, if you like. You know, they come into universities with roughly the same tariff points and they exit with lower grades, which has an impact, significant impact on their life chances. You know, earlier today, I was a keynote speaker at a doctoral conference, a Wales doctoral conference, and I was saying to them that one of the reasons, of course, we don't have many Black and minority ethnic people doing PhDs, doctoral programs, is because you don't have many Black and minority ethnic people that are graduating at the top grades, and it's the top grades that you need, you know, a first-class degree or a very high 2-1 that you need to be able to get access to a research council grant. If you don't get that, then it impacts on the life chances you have in many areas. We look at health, and we know already that Black women, for example, are more likely to die, up to 4 times more likely to die in childbirth than their white counterparts. 2024, should this be happening in a country like ours? It shouldn't, but it is. Law and order, practically every area of life you look at, ethnic minorities are more likely to receive the harder end of the deal, whatever that deal may be. And that is a problem. And for that problem, we've tried all sorts of things. Governments of all persuasions have tried all sorts of ways of resolving that problem, particularly those ones that recognize that there is a problem. We've tried race equality. It hasn't seemed to work. We've tried multiculturalism. It doesn't seem to work very well. And more recently, we've tried equality, diversity, and inclusion. And again, that hasn't worked particularly well. You know, all these things have failed, all these approaches have failed because they have relied essentially on a society where majority of people are non-racist, but would not do anything actively to stop racism from occurring. we are simply not doing enough as individuals. And all the policies themselves have relied on a notion that individuals are not racist, or that systems, societies, processes are themselves not racist, and that whatever people achieve in life will be based on what their, if you like, efforts lead them to achieve. And we know that not to be the case. We know because all the policies we see tend to be applied in a colorblind way. Colorblind in the sense that you will say everybody has an equal chance, an equal opportunity of getting a job. But well, in the case of the PhD studentship that I've just told you, if people are less likely to get a first-class degree, which is the gold standard in getting a job, and that is racialized, then it goes without saying that if you came to an institution, for example, in the business school where I work, which by the way is one of the largest business schools in the country, and I have worked there for well over 30 years, and in the time I have been there, I've only ever seen about 5 or 6 PhD students that are Black. This is the largest, mind you, one of the largest, if not the largest, in the United Kingdom. So there is something that is creating that. If we don't have that opportunity, then we are never going to be able to get to that place in the way that other groups are able to do that. So we are essentially relying on the same behaviors, the same processes that created all these things, these outcomes, these racialized outcomes. We're relying on them in a colorblind fashion, but expecting something different to happen. Now, why is colorblindness a real problem in society? I'm going to use an example, a recent example, the pandemic. Only a few years ago, there's something that was not widely known at the time. And it was a way that hospitals, health establishments were trying to isolate patients so that they could determine the order of priority in terms of treatment. I think in medical terminology, it would be called, what do they call it? When patients come in, is it something they call it, which escapes me now, where they try to determine which patients have the strongest needs, so that they could be able to treat them accordingly. Remember that they didn't have the oxygen and the facilities to be able to treat everybody. So when the ambulance people came to your house to see you, what they would do is they will use this equipment called a pulse oximeter. Pulse oximetry, some of you may be familiar with it, a very small medical device that they slip through your finger, and then it would give them your blood oxygen reading. And then if your blood oxygen reading was low or below a certain level, they decided immediately to take you straight to emergency, and then you may be one of the lucky ones that get the oxygen that was in very short supply. Unfortunately, the pulse oximeter was developed in a colorblind way. It was developed, though, with the white skin in mind. So it worked very well if you put it on a white skin. If you put it on a black skin, the darker the skin color, the more likely it is that the reading will be misleading. Now, the New England College of Medicine Journal in America published this information many, many years ago and said, we've got to be careful. This thing doesn't give good readings for Black people. Nobody took it seriously. In the pandemic, we were using that. And that was perhaps overestimating the blood oxygenation of many Black people. Now, we would never know how many people died as a result of that. The Department of Health did an inquiry, which I thought was botched, and they ended up saying, well, it's not right, but we don't think it played a significant role. How can it not play a significant role if you had a situation where people might have been denied access to emergency life-saving treatment because the technology the physicians had in front of them was saying to them that this person's condition is not perhaps as bad as the next person's condition. Anti-racist thinking would have helped us to identify this in advance. In fact, we knew it because it was published already in America, but we decided not to take it seriously anyway. It would have helped us to identify this in advance and would have helped us to perhaps develop a technology that was not colorblind, that took into consideration the fact that different people are influenced, impacted by different things in that sense. And this is partly one reason why the Welsh government decided to go for an anti-racist plan. And this is one reason why you should support the anti-racist Wales Action Plan. So what can I say? What would be my reflection, or if you like, my recommendation to you, those people that are on this call, those people that are responsible for educating our children? What can you do to help to eradicate racism in Wales? I know I haven't got so much time, so I decided to focus on three things that I think are important. The first one is the role of leadership. I think leadership is key to achieving anti-racism. As I said earlier, my main research area is organizational culture and strategy. And I know from well over 30 years of research in this area that you cannot achieve change if leaders don't play a key role in that process itself. Leaders are key because leaders are the ones with the vision. They come in with that vision and they inspire people to change. The people that are following you are always looking at you for a cue or cues as to how to behave. And it's only when you give that credible, passionate, persuasive leadership on anti-racism that your followers are likely to want to follow that. Leaders should lead the change. Leaders should stress the importance of anti-racism. If you don't stress the importance, then people are not going to find it important. Remember, managers in particular, and other people, teachers, anybody, there are too many things that to do. There are too many competing priorities. We have to find a way of allocating our time, and we are more likely to allocate time to the things leaders tell us are important, because that's how we will be judged. Some leaders might even decide to include this in their key performance indicators, and perhaps also include them in the key performance indicators of the people they are managing. The idea that your school, your institution will stand for zero tolerance on racism is something that you can profess and perhaps make it a standing item on your meetings, agenda for meetings. Now, the second point is that we should be proactive in making anti-racism a reality. In particular, I think the worst thing we can do is to be bystanders, as they call it in the language, to just be there and not be active. Because as I said earlier, we know that the far majority of people in this country are not racist, but yet they continue to preside over a society and institutions that are racialized, over outcomes that are racialized. Some of the things I caught as I joined the call of experiences of young people on the basis of their race makes it even worse. And some of them are essentially just based on their race. And again, I will give you another example to illustrate my point about the dangers of being bystanders. Some of you may have seen something that trended on social media about a year or two ago. It was a case of, if you haven't seen it, please have a look at it. It really is troubling. It's a case of a young Irish gymnast, maybe about 9, maybe about 10. and she was receiving in line with other young people, gymnasts, all of them white. She was the only visibly black person there. And they were all receiving medals. One of these events that schools like, where everybody is a winner, I think. Everybody was receiving a medal. And the person who was handing these medals handed the person who was, the young person who was next to the Irish, the black girl, handed a medal to them. And then the young Irish black girl naturally expected her own, I think bowed her head slightly to get hers. And then this woman walked past her and then handed a medal to the person that was right next to her. So she didn't get one. Now, you could argue that maybe it was a mistake, maybe it wasn't. We would never know. But one thing we did know was that, and I think you will see it when you watch it, was that all the people around this young girl didn't do anything to help her discomfort, what should have been seen as her discomfort. If anything, they were just watching, bemused by it. The photographer that was there wanted to come closer to get a caption, a close-up caption of the girl, maybe her grimace or whatever he thought he was trying to do. And there were teachers, other teachers there, and they didn't do anything. Nobody did anything. And then the Irish Gymnast Association itself, when the family contacted them and said, we think this is a case of racism, we really would like it if you undergo anti-racist training. They said, no, we don't agree. This has nothing to do with racism. There's no racism here. We abhor racism. We don't agree with racism. And the family was left in their distress until a famous gymnast, Simone Biles, took it upon herself to tweet about it, and then suddenly became a big issue for them. And they decided they were going to try and settle, to try and bring the family in and to try and do more, etc., etc. Imagine how that young girl would have felt. Imagine the impact it would have had on her for the rest of her life. The point I think I just about heard Uzo saying about her daughter, you know, the impact it may have on a person like that, to be treated in that way, and to have all those people you respected standing there, watching it and doing nothing. That is the worst form of racism. If you are participating in a system like that and you do nothing about it, then you are endorsing racism. It doesn't matter whether you're a racist or a non-racist. You are endorsing it, because if you were an anti-racist, you would have automatically done something then. It may be a mistake. You try and correct it and say to the lady, you've omitted this girl. And then she would say, no, I don't want to give her. Or she would say, oh, my Lord, I didn't mean to. I am so sorry. Go to the young girl and pacify her. And the young girl would even not think about it again. It would never have been an incident, but it was. It could have been something greater than that. But it was an example, nonetheless, that we can look at. So it's really difficult, and this is my last point, which arises from the previous two. It's very difficult for us to eradicate racism if every person, especially the people who have power, the people who are perpetuating racism, unfortunately, in this instance, they happen to, in this particular context, happen to be white people. If every white person doesn't behave differently, or at least many of them that are in that category of non-racist and racist, if they don't behave differently, it will be difficult, if not impossible, for us to eradicate racism. Why do I say that? I say that because whatever we do, you know, racism in that sense is resistant, and it's resistant because there are always people that will do the things that promote it. A bit like the virus. If their conditions are right, the virus will continue to thrive. We have to create a different condition to kill the virus. You know, we wouldn't have been able to eradicate, or well, maybe we haven't, but at least to substantially do away with COVID-19 if we continued the same behaviors that encouraged it and that allowed it to thrive. So we have to do things differently. How do we do things differently? It can come in different ways, shapes, and forms. You have to be conscious. You have to be active in scrutinizing yourselves as individuals, the places where you work, the people that you lead, yourself as a leader, the behaviors which may contribute to racially disproportionate outcomes. You have to keep thinking about what they may be and then thinking about the ways you challenge them. A simple exercise is to think about the people, how you engage in your voluntary action, your voluntary behavior, the people that you choose to mentor, the people that you choose to go the extra mile for. If you're a class teacher, how you deal with the people, the young people in your classrooms, whether in fact you deal with them in the same way. Very few people do. Think about the stereotypes that you may hold of particular people. As you're growing up, you did develop stereotypes. Don't try to pretend that you don't have it, because that makes it even worse. We all have stereotypes that we developed in childhood. Unfortunately, many of those stereotypes are stored in our deep subconscious, and then we often evoke them, even without being aware, in situations where we are faced with realities that relate to those stereotypes. An example I always use is 2017. I was coming back I just finished a study on FTSE 100 organizations, and it was launched at the House of Commons. And I remember I was coming back, I never forget that, and I got onto a train in London Underground. It was empty, the carriage was more or less empty. And there was an old woman sitting there. As soon as I came in, I looked towards her direction. She took her bag and put it close to her, as if to think, this big black guy is coming, he must be a thief, must be coming to thief or something like that. Not realizing that the person who's just coming is a university professor. In 2017, I would have been a professor for 15, 16 years, of 16 years standing. And that is just come from the House of Commons, having launched a successful research project. She couldn't have envisaged that because her stereotype of Black people was very negative. Not some Black people in the same way that some white people could be, but it was just of Black people. Because if she had an open mind and if she was able to scrutinize that stereotype, she might even have thought, what if this person is a Nobel Prize winner? Suddenly, you think differently. Instead of wanting to hide your bag, you'll be wanting to strike up a conversation in case you learn something new. So those things we must do as individuals, because if we don't, it becomes very difficult for us to behave differently. And it is only by doing things differently that we are able to have a chance of extinguishing the powers that make this virus thrive. And that will be my last comment for today. I'll be happy to take any questions if they're there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. That was absolutely brilliant, as usual. Do you have any questions, anybody, for Professor Emmanuel Ogbonna? I see some interesting comments in the chat, and I'm seeing one question from Sebastian. Professor Ogbonna, would you say that the intake of students from non-Black ethnic minorities, example, Indian, Chinese, at your business school, generally reflected statistically the racial makeup of the UK? That was one question. If other people have questions, can you put your hand up, please, so that we can pick you up? If you don't know how to do your electronic hand, just put your video on and show us your hand, and I can pick you up because I can see most of you on the screen. All right, there's Newton Brown. Newton, can you unmute yourself and tell us which organization you come from or school and ask your question? Thank you.
Hi, I come from NPC College, which is a college in the middle of Wales. I'm an officer, employment officer. My question is, you said it's difficult to eradicate racism. The target is to eradicate racism by 2030. Now that's just, what, 6 years away. Do they really mean that, or are they thinking 30-20?
That's a good point. You see, I said it's difficult to eradicate without people doing things differently. So if we all encourage everybody we know to do things differently today, then there's every likelihood we succeed by 2030. But 2030 is an ambition. Without setting a target, then you are targeting to fail. So we are targeting 2030. And if by 2030 we come to a point where we are no longer speaking of it as defining the experience of practically every Black and minority ethnic person, and that we're only speaking of it as, oh, one of those things that can happen, as opposed to something that is central in defining and describing people's lives, then we would say that we have achieved something that is magnificent. But it is a target that we are aiming for. Whether we do it or not depends on how the people that work with us, because it's often easy to see racism as a problem for Black and minority ethnic people. In fact, it is not a problem for them, just that they are the people that are affected by the effects of it. It's just as much a problem for white people, whether they are perpetrators of it, which is only about 26% of people in society, or whether they fall into the vast majority of people that are not racist, but that don't consider it important enough to spend time and think about their role in the process.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Emmanuel Obona. Any other hands up? Let's check. Any other questions? Anybody? Okay, somebody's asking, they've sent a chat to our computer system. They wanted to know what were the potential outcomes from the fact that school teachers who feel overwhelmed and are doing their very best to maintain standards of excellence in schools, but feel overwhelmed because they're not able to understand whether an incident is specifically racist when words to that effect is not being used directly. So it's not overt racism, but there's circumstances around a particular report that makes people guess. You know, they speak, but it's a bit, you know, nothing specifically racist has happened. How can they say this is a racist incident? That was the crux of the question. Prof, can you help?
Yeah, you've got to see the incident. It's very difficult to talk about abstract situations like that if we don't know what the incident referred to is. But you have to, the most important thing that I think a school can do in that sense is to make sure that individuals understand what racism is. My experience from talking to some, not many, not everybody I speak to, but some of the white people that I speak to, is that their understanding of racism is very different from the experiences of ethnic minority people. You know, so ethnic minority person would automatically, immediately know when something is racist. But a white person would interpret it as a general rule in very different ways. So I think it's very important to pay attention to the person who is affected or to the people who are affected. If they perceive something as racist, then we should take those things seriously. In some cases, they may say, I don't think this is racist, but I think it's something that we should look at. Then we should look at it in those terms. It's not for us then to attribute that meaning to it because the person who is concerned has said it is not.
Thank you very much. Okay, I think we've come to a natural conclusion. Is Judge Singh still in the meeting so he can have the last few words? Somebody's saying, thank you, happy to speak to anybody here about the work of Into Film, if anyone is interested. So that's great, please contact. It is hard to be in, but you must reinforce the fact that if she don't report it, then there'll be no other targets who could go on to self-harming or worse because of not having strong support or even not being believed. It is so important that teachers recognize the trigger point in law and actively do something about it. I thank you all for coming along. Please, please, please contact somebody. Don't continue on your own. And there's a lot of help out there. We will get out as much of this information as possible to you. It's also been live streamed. So after the event, you can rewatch the sections you missed, you know, on Twitter, etc., etc. And also check out our Zero Racism Wales pledge. Please sign the pledge if you are able to. If Judge Singh is here, can you greet everybody as they leave? I knew that he had to disappear earlier. Is the chair still here? Okay. No. So on behalf of all the speakers who have spoken through today, we've had quite a lot of people who came along to the session and gave their input free of charge just to support schools. I'm very, very grateful to you. Hopefully next time we can get some funding and acknowledge your time. So you had Judge Ray Singh at the beginning, Natalie Jones, Mohammed Alamgir, Professor Charlotte Williams, Amy Grimwood, Joanne Maximu King, Chantel Horton, Dean Pimble. We had Professor Emmanuel Obona. Please, thank you to the people of Wales who continue to plug, to do the best that they can in very difficult circumstances. And if you know where Race Council can get funding, please tell us. We do need to pay people to do what they do and not keep asking everyone to work for free. Thank you to all the teachers who are absolutely amazing and doing such wonderful work. We thank you. Here's to a more inclusive and anti-racist Wales by 2030. Take care, everyone. Thank you to Taiwo, our IT man. We're very grateful for your help. Apologies for the earlier hiccup. Bye, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Thank you. An incredible event. Thank you.
Thank you.